I'm Teresa Coraggio, and this is Third Paradigm, in which I'm going to be responding to Russell Brand's podcast, Under the Skin, number 28, Marxism on the Rise. Can it defeat capitalism? And this is with David Harvey, a very lively exchange that I am eager to be part of. What I'm going to look at is I'm calling need, greed, and the 3P. And I'm going to look at whether there is a third paradigm that would be neither Marxism nor capitalism. So let's get started. First, I think you have to define what capitalism is. I find people use the term and I'm not sure what they mean by it, and I'm not sure they are either. So capitalism, in simplest terms, is a system that favors the accumulation of capital. So what's capital? Capital is what the United Nations defines as wealth, that they never mention money when they define wealth. They talk about natural capital, which is the land, the air, the water, the climate. Physical capital, which are the properties and the infrastructure. And then human capital, which is not the people themselves, but are the education, skill level, and creativity of the people. And so our function as governments, I believe, is to protect the natural capital, to provide the physical capital, and to proliferate the human capital in terms of all of our skills and creativity. So Marxism is a system that favors need, that the slogan is to each according to their need, from each according to their ability. Does prioritizing need work as a means of distribution? What you have in that case is that those who have created the product don't actually own it. That the simplest way of determining ownership is that if your community owns its own assets, owns its land and its infrastructure and its buildings, then whatever you're creating is coming from that community. Your labor belongs to you. And so at that point, you are able to provide for your own needs. One of David's objections to whether Gandhi's 7,000 villages that were autonomous, that were self-governing, whether that would work, which is what Russell had suggested and also what I stand for. He says, well, what if there's a crisis? What if there's a crop failure? What if there's a famine? I think that you don't need to have some kind of centralized distribution system in order to make people be nice to each other. Someone who talks about that is David Graeber in his book, where he says that the Greenland Inuits were indignant when someone thanked them for providing seal meat that they needed. And they said, up here we are human, and because we're human, we help each other. We say that by gifts one makes slaves, and by whips one makes dogs. Another person who takes that same perspective is the South American theologian Ivan Illich. He was against institutionalized welfare systems because what he said is that it took away from us the thing that made us most human, which is our generosity, our desire to help each other. Once you make that something that a welfare state is responsible for, you no longer need to do that. And you don't create that relationship between the reciprocity of someone who is the giver and the person who is who has that natural sense of gratitude, and also of feeling that there is a way of being reciprocal, whether that's in goods or not. So destroying relationships and turning them into a commodification is something that Russell talks about. He talks about it in terms of just that day-to-day and recognizing in himself how much he looked at his relationships in terms of what could that person do for me. I think this is really a terrible thing about capitalism, that capitalism forces us to look at all of our relationships, especially if we're in business for ourselves and not working for a corporation, that we're always looking at, how can I get your money? And it's hard to really trust, does this person like me, or am I a commodity to them? So I think that bringing our relationships back is a source of wealth, and knowing that we're in a community where we are just human. We just take care of each other because that's what humans do. That's something I think that we should try before we decide that that's not going to work and that we need some kind of overarching system to enable people to be kind rather than the system that we have now, which is that you have to hoard. You have to hoard money because you don't know what's going to happen in your life. You don't know that there's anything that you can depend on to get through the rest of your life. So I look at what I call the unaffordable 4H, which is housing, healthcare, higher education, and hope for retirement. All of those are out of reach. And so the commodities that David talks about as being something that we are in this kind of consumer glut right now, I'm not sure that that's true. And a person who validates that is Elizabeth Warren in this book that she wrote, I think almost 2 decades ago, with her daughter. And there she shows that the average American family spends less than their grandparents did as a percentage of their income on food, clothing, vacations, appliances, and cars. So the things that are luxuries, we actually have less of our earned income that is going towards those things, and more of them that are going towards just keeping us afloat. So when Russell talks about the seduction of comfort and needing to give that up, I don't think we should. I think that we should first give up all the things that don't make us happy. Hour-long commutes, wars of aggression, those don't make me very happy. So let's get rid of those and let's keep the things that make us feel good, and see whether we can first fix that problem and be able to come to a place where it's okay for us to have things that are beautiful, things that are soft, that are fuzzy, that are comfortable. None of those need capitalism or need to be taken away from someone else. We can all be doing more of that and creating more of that for each other. So when I look at this third paradigm as small-scale sovereignty, and I say, how would you create that? The first thing I say is, leave the money, take the assets. As communities, we need to own our own assets. And right now, there is, David mentions this, that capital really has nowhere else to go. And I write about that in my book also, How to Dismantle an Empire, that we're in a crisis of overaccumulation for capital, that capital has gobbled up everything that is worth anything. So those assets haven't increased, but the amount of money has ballooned to now $330 trillion as the price tag that they put on the world. So obviously, none of those real things that the United Nations talks about, they haven't really increased in value. They're degrading pretty quickly, as a matter of fact. But this price tag has. And so we need to have community capitalism. We need to have a way of proliferating that capital that we own as communities. And within those systems, what I look at is that all ways that money is made from money should belong to the community. Because if you're producing this money that is backed by the assets, and you own the assets and you're creating the credit against it, then you as a community should be having the benefit of that. But all ways that money is made from labor should belong to the individual. That individual has put the work into it and should be able to reap the rewards. If you had a system where that was the case, we could all be working a couple mornings a week, feeding ourselves on shared land that belongs to the community. David mentions that when we were subsistence farmers, that we typically worked something like 4 hours, is it a week or a day? Something like that. Either one isn't a bad thing. And so if you have that kind of free time, then you can, in this shared system of providing services and goods to each other, backed again by the debt, by the mortgages, by the mortgage that goes back into the community, we could spend maybe 20 hours a week where we were doing good things that our neighbors wanted. Not where there's some central distribution, but where they have the means to buy our labor at a reasonable cost, and we can provide food, we can provide well care, we can help fix houses, we can teach, all those things that people do for each other in a community, in a system that does have that unit of trade, that does have reciprocity in it. What that would give us the freedom to do is that all ways that ideas are spread, that things are made available to a wide audience, don't need to be commodified. And it would get Russell out of the question of, how do I commodify my time? Because you can see in his videos, he just wants to give everything away. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And I think that our communities and our system, our economic system, should allow each of us to give the best of ourselves while we provide for our own needs and for each other's needs. If you enjoyed this and you want to join my conspiracy, you can go to my channel with the 3P that is somewhere in the corner. Thank you. If you're intrigued and would like to go deeper into these ideas, here's another video on a related theme. And if you'd like to delve into this entire area, here's a playlist. Thank you, and I would love it if you would subscribe.